All right, guys, if your Boulder house hunting trip has to happen over just one long weekend, the order in which you use that house hunting trip matters a lot more than the number of houses that you see. I see it happen all the time with relocation buyers. They land in Denver, rent their car, drive out to Boulder, and then drive from house to house to house to house. By the end of the first day alone, they've seen 8 houses, 2 or 3 different towns, a couple different price points, and they can't remember which kitchen went with what house. That is obviously not a productive house hunting trip. So a good 3-day house hunting trip should answer 3 questions. Day 1 should be, where do I want to live? Day 2 should be like, what kind of house can I realistically buy there? And day 3 should be, am I comfortable enough with this decision to where I can comfortably move forward and write an offer? So if you're flying to Colorado and you have 72 hours to figure out this whole thing out, here's how I would structure your trip. So the big tip is, a house hunting trip actually starts before you get on the plane. If we wait until you've landed here in Colorado to decide where you want to live, what we think you can afford, and what houses we're going to see, we wasted a huge chunk of your trip and we've worked really inefficiently. So before you get on your plane, before you even book your trip, we should have the answer to 4 big questions. Number 1 is, what can I afford? And that doesn't mean just like the maximum number the lender supplies you with, but what kind of purchase can you make and still live comfortably in your budget and be able to pursue the lifestyle you want to pursue out here in Boulder? Question number 2 is, when do you want to move or when do you need to move? Is it 6 weeks out, 3 months, 6 months? That question can really change how aggressively we need to move and how we can structure our house hunting trip to make sure we're finding the perfect house for you that fits your time frame. Question number 3 is, where are you going to be spending your time? Where are you going to be traveling to? So where do you work? If you have a spouse, where do they go to work? If you have kids, where do they go to school or what activities do they do? Where do you expect to spend your time outside of your working hours? And question number 4 is, we need to have a good firm list that separates your must-haves from your preferences, right? 3-car garage might be a must-have. Mountain views might be a preference. A finished basement might be a preference, and 3 bedrooms on the same floor might be a must-have. It's important to have these goals and our must-haves laid out on paper because it's really easy to get lost as we're going through houses on the bells and whistles or the things we saw in pictures and lose track of what really put us out here and what really narrowed this house down to what we want to see from the masses of homes that we saw online. And one more quick tip while we're on the subject is, if you are making the trip out here, I would say don't automatically book the cheapest flight possible. If saving $120 means that you land at 10:30 at night on your first day, you get no activity done that day, and you start your next morning exhausted, jet lagged, and just not happy, that's a really big waste of time, right? So yes, we want to be budget conscious, but you're not just trying to book a cheap vacation here. You're trying to make a potentially $1 million financial decision. So it's important that we're in the best mindset we can be, we're properly rested, we've eaten well, and we have a great first experience. We land in Colorado so we can make sure we're getting the most of our trip here to find the best house we can in Boulder. All right, so let's talk about day 1. And this is probably the biggest surprise that relocation buyers get from me, is I would say don't spend the whole first day shopping for houses. If you've never spent a meaningful amount of time in Boulder, I would say taking your whole morning and scheduling a 6-house tour is not going to be the most effective use of your time. Because the last thing we want to do is find a house that you fall in love with, only for us to realize a few weeks or a few months down the road that the neighborhood that you're in just doesn't mesh with your lifestyle and you're not happy with all the people around your household just because you fell in love inside those 4 walls. So let's say, for example, you're considering Boulder, Louisville, Longmont, or Superior, 4 very close towns that on paper look like they can all work for the same buyer. But the actual lived experience and the lifestyle that those 3 communities offers will be very, very different. So I'd hate to see you make the mistake of finding the perfect house in the wrong town or the wrong neighborhood and that messing up your whole lived experience here in Boulder. So let's start with the morning. And I would say start in the morning on day 1 and let's start in Boulder. And the first thing we're gonna do is take a nice little drive. Drive to those areas that actually match your budget first. Don't just go to downtown Pearl Street and start walking up and down looking at all the cool things and bars and restaurants and people running around and say, oh man, Boulder is beautiful. This is the perfect place for us to live. Because doing that tells you almost nothing about the neighborhood you're actually gonna end up buying in someday. Look at the streets you're driving through. Look at the housing stock. Look at the size of the homes and the size of the lots. See where they're at relative to the trails and the nature if you're an outdoors person. Look at how far away those neighborhoods are located from grocery stores and schools and that list of places that you're likely to visit week in and week out that we talked about earlier. If you're picking a neighborhood because you think you could bike everywhere, drive the route you're actually gonna ride on your bike. If you're buying a home because it has great mountain access, look at the actual trails you'd be using, not just the general access to the mountain. And pay attention to the homes that you're not actually planning on touring. This can be one of the fastest ways to narrow down and include or exclude a neighborhood. All right, so now we're hitting midday. I would say grab some lunch. Now we're gonna check out a couple neighboring towns. We're gonna check out Louisville, and Superior. And Louisville can fit like a bit of a mid-ground to a lot of buyers, right? You're still gonna have access to Boulder, but it's got its own cool, unique downtown, and the style of home, the environment that you're gonna run into, and just the, kind of the day-to-day experience is gonna be a nice, useful contrast that we saw in Boulder. And Superior is gonna give you another really solid version of that same decision. So as we're going through Louisville and Superior in our midday trip, we're gonna be asking ourselves some important questions. And the big one is gonna be, do I need to be in Boulder, or do I just need access to Boulder? And those are gonna have completely different requirements. And answering that question honestly can really affect how we use our budget in the best way possible to give you the best house and your best lifestyle. If you need to be in Boulder, our budget's gonna be mostly used to buy that Boulder lifestyle. If we just need access to Boulder, we can assess our budget and maybe look at getting a little bit larger house or a little more space while still accomplishing that same goal of having easy access to Boulder. All right, so now we've wrapped up midday, we've grabbed a snack and a cup of coffee, and we're gonna spend a part of our afternoon up in Longmont. So this is where we can really kind of see the other end of the equation, right? We've spent a lot of time in Boulder, Superior, and Louisville, where we've looked at either a very lifestyle heavy leaning or maybe looking at a mid-ground between lifestyle and size of home. Now we're going to be looking up in Longmont where we can really get a lot more home for our dollar. So as we're up there, we're going to be considering a few different questions. And mostly I want to say, how do you feel up there? Is the additional house that you're seeing for your dollar worth the additional distance you have to travel to get into Boulder? Does Longmont feel too far away, or does it feel like a reasonable trade-off because maybe you work full-time remote or you only go into the office a few days a week, so having the extra house makes a ton of sense for you? Do you like the community of Longmont in and of itself? Or are you only looking at that area because you get more house for the same dollar? Because those are gonna be very important distinctions to make. All right, so now before we wrap up day one, I'm gonna ask you guys to do one more test, and I do think it's critical, I think it's very important to do what I call the rush hour test. So let's make sure we're driving the routes that we talked about. We're gonna have those destinations we're gonna be going to a week in and week out. Let's do that test drive. So if you're driving into Boulder, but you wanna live in Longmont, do that drive, but do it at rush hour. Do when other people are making the commute. Don't just trust what your phone says the commute's gonna be like at 10:30 in the morning on a Tuesday. Because we want to know and we want to mimic to the best of our ability your daily lived experience traveling from your house to your likely destinations and back and forth. Similarly, if you're considering, living in Boulder proper or even Louisville or Superior and you travel into Denver for work, we want to understand what that commute looks like too. Because a 25-minute drive into Denver from Boulder can feel great at one time of day, but it can feel much different during rush hour, during a busier time when traffic's a lot more intense. And while you're doing this, you need to ask yourself, am I okay with making this drive 5 days a week? And that's gonna be a much better question to ask yourself when you're thinking about your daily lifestyle than, am I okay living in Longmont and driving into Boulder? So hopefully we've been really effective with our time, and I think if we follow this schedule, by the end of day one, we've answered a lot of the big questions. Maybe you came into this thinking, I could be comfortable in Boulder, Longmont, Louisville, Superior, whatever. But at the end of day one, we've done our homework and we said, you know what, man, Longmont is not for us. I need to be in Boulder or I need to be in Louisville, and that's it. And I would call that a pretty darn productive day. We've just eliminated 2 or 3 towns and hundreds of listings to where we're gonna get the most value of our time here starting day 2. All right, so day 2 is upon us, and today is the day we're gonna get real serious about looking at actual properties. But I do think there's a big mistake that a lot of relocation buyers make, is they take a volume approach. They think that the more houses they look at, the more effective and efficient trip they're gonna be because they've seen the most information. But in my experience, that's just not true. If I spend one day showing you 15 houses, the whole last 5 are gonna be a complete waste of time because you're gonna have a ton of trouble differentiating one house from another. You're gonna be tired, you're gonna be hungry, and it's all gonna kind of blend together and be a big mishmash of general homes we've seen without actually identifying the best home for you. So for most buyers, I think choosing a hyper-focused select group of homes that we think are our most likely candidates, and maybe a few others to put in there for comparison's sake, is gonna be the most valuable way to schedule our time for day 2. And some of the most effective houses that we're gonna see on day 2 are gonna be ones that we really don't expect to buy. I'm sure you're thinking, why? Well, because they help establish our boundaries. So for example, let's say you really have a great idea, but you want that old classic Boulder home. So if that's the case, I would say we should see one that exactly fits that narrative, a beautiful old traditional Boulder home. But I think we should also see one that's maybe renovated, right? Maybe a similar age of home, but it's got more modern finishes. Maybe the previous owner has put some money into it and brought things up to some modern niceties that we're used to seeing in newer homes today. I think 3, we should also see maybe a newer home in a newer neighborhood, because that means we're not just comparing homes one another, we're comparing trade-offs. We're comparing the benefits we might get from an older home as well as seeing some of the trade-offs we're giving up by not selecting a newer home. All right, so we talked about kind of using day 2 most effectively, and the big surprise we've seen is we don't want to see an endless number of homes. We don't want to see 15 homes in one day. So a really fair follow-up question to that is going to be, okay, Andrew, how many homes should we see then? And I'm going to cop out and say, hey, there's no magic number. right? There's no specific number that I am aware of that says, hey, this is the exact number of homes you're going to see. It's not HGTV. We don't see 3 homes and pick one. But I think it's about being very selective and very strategic with the homes we do choose to see. So if we can see, I don't know, 6 to 8 highly relevant homes to what you're looking for, and we can learn something from each one of those, that's gonna be a much more beneficial and much more rewarding trip than if we saw 15 random homes off the MLS. And more than just the number of homes, we wanna make sure we're scheduling them and ordering them intelligently. We don't just wanna see your favorite house first day in the morning. Maybe it works out that way, but I think it's more important to look at different options. Here's what $1 million gets you in Boulder. Here's what the same budget gets you in Louisville. Here's what you get if you go a little bit more out of the way. It's important to have those comparisons. And again, we're gonna start from a broader base and narrow things down slowly until we identify the best home for you guys. So now what do we do when we're actually inside homes? Because I can tell you by house number 4, you're gonna start forgetting things. So we're gonna make sure we're documenting things in each individual house so we have everything straight. We're gonna start documenting things that maybe the photographer didn't emphasize in the listings they chose to put online. So there's gonna be a list of things I think it's important to take quick snapshots of so we can go back later and reference them to make sure we keep all the homes that we're gonna see straight. So number 1, we're gonna photograph the view from the backyard. We're gonna photograph the neighboring home so we can see kind of what the neighbor's house looks like as well. We're gonna take photos of the street. Is it really busy? Are there a lot of cars parked on it? How well are the trees and the other street features kept? We're gonna photograph the ugly mechanical room with the water heater and the furnace to make sure that's clean and in good shape. We're gonna photograph the basement ceiling height, right? So oftentimes some of the older homes will have dugout basements. Those ceilings can be rather low and can be difficult for some taller buyers to really enjoy. We're also gonna photograph the stairs going up and down, whether it's up to a second floor or down to a basement. And of course, last, we're gonna photograph anything that you really want to remember, anything that struck you as really cool, really bad, really strange. And if there's an awkward layout or an awkward path to take throughout the house, let's take a quick video of it as well. And then when we get back in the car, you're gonna give each house a rating immediately. It doesn't have to be complicated, doesn't have to be a huge line graph. Just give me yes, no, or maybe for each house, and we're gonna start knocking out our options as we're proceeding through our tour. We don't wanna wait until dinner time later and try to think back to which every home we saw we liked, what we didn't like. We don't want it to have a grading scale by memory. When you get out, you're gonna have an immediate feeling, yes, no, maybe, absolutely not. No matter what your answer is, you're gonna say, great. And I'm gonna adjust the list. Because when we sit down later for dinner, when we sit down after you guys have had a chance to talk, I wanna be able to have a much shorter list of your top choices so we can dig in deeper. And we're really gonna pay attention to what's going on around us as we're going from house to house to house as well. This local experience is really gonna matter because maybe a house looks great online, but maybe the traffic pattern really stinks. Maybe it's a really busy road. Maybe there's a nearby commercial property that you don't wanna live near. Maybe the lot's kind of an odd shape and not all the yard is usable. Or maybe there's a future development going in place that is gonna disrupt your lifestyle for a while. Maybe the driveway's just a little too steep or kind of navigating through the neighborhood isn't something you want to deal with. These are the reasons why I don't want your trip out here to be a series of me opening lock boxes and walking through a bunch of cookie cutter homes. Every neighborhood, every home is very different, and we want to make sure we're identifying all the possible stumbling blocks ahead of time so you're not having buyer's remorse 6 months down the road when the home that you love ends up being not in the neighborhood that you like anymore, or the day-to-day lifestyle you bought into isn't what you want to live with. All right, so we had our big house hunting trip today. Now we're at the end of day 2, we're at evening 2, and it's time to sit down for dinner with either by yourself or with your partner, and it's time to start getting ruthless. We do not want to keep 10 houses alive at the end of day 2. We're gonna have to make some cuts. So ideally, I would say let's cut these homes into 3 categories. Category 1 is, I would buy this house. Category 2 is, I wouldn't buy this house, but I would buy houses somewhat like it. And the third option is, well, this house did a great job of helping me understand what I do not want. Now, the first category is obvious, but the second category is very, very important too, because you may not find the exact house you want on your first visit, and depending on your timeline, it may not be feasible for you to write an offer on a house, even if you do really like it. And that's all okay. If you leave Colorado knowing exactly what you want, having a really good idea about the kind of house you want, that is a successful trip in my book. Because if we're not going under contract on our home in this first visit, once you get back home, I can evaluate all the new listings and only deliver to you the cream of the crop options are gonna be exactly what you're looking for. All right, so now we're at the morning of day 3, our last day in town. And day 3, in my opinion, is really about verification. It's not about seeing another dozen homes. If you have a favorite property, let's go back and check it out again, especially if your timeline is such that you want to be writing an offer this weekend. And if at all possible, if you found a home or a neighborhood that you really liked on the day before, let's go see that neighborhood on a different time of day. A quiet neighborhood at 11 a.m. might feel quite a bit different at 5:30 p.m. And a neighborhood that seemed too far away when you were first looking at it on the map might feel pretty reasonable after you've driven around Boulder for a day. Or quite the opposite, a neighborhood that felt right where you wanted to be might feel miles away from the places you fell in love with during your trip. Day 3 is a great day to verify and really challenge your initial first impression on Boulder or any neighborhoods that we've seen. If the commute to work matters, drive it again. If school matters on your decision, Find out where it's physically located at relative to the house you're looking at. If you expect to spend your weekends in Boulder, drive from your favorite house to the physical locations you think you're going to spend most of your time. And if you're considering Longmont still, drive back up there and ask yourself, am I still willing to trade the additional house for the additional drive? And another good cheat code, if you're still not sure which house is your favorite, by the morning of day 3, I want you to think about which house keeps coming up in your conversations. Maybe not the prettiest one, maybe not the biggest one, maybe not the one right down in downtown Boulder, but which one just keeps kind of bubbling up to the surface? Which neighborhood do you find yourself comparing all the other neighborhoods that you've checked out to? And which compromise do you suddenly find yourself willing to make after you've actually put a house or a neighborhood up against it? Those are signs and signals that you might have narrowed things down a lot more than you thought. Oftentimes buyers will come into Boulder absolutely certain they need a minimum of 3,000 square feet. That's how big their current house is. That's where all their stuff fits. They know that that's exactly what they need. And they spend 2 days in Boulder and find like, hey, maybe we can make 2,500 square feet work if we're in the right location. And some buyers have the exact opposite experience. They come in knowing they want to be right in the heart of Boulder, and they look at some Boulder options, they check out Louisville, they check out Longmont, and they say like, hey, you know what? Now that I'm seeing these homes and how my lifestyle fits here, I don't need to have a Boulder address on my mail. I'd rather have this home in easy Boulder access. And those kinds of insights are exactly what this trip is supposed to reveal. All right, guys, this has been a really productive trip so far, but we do have a little bit of homework to do before we have to go to the airport. So before we leave Colorado, I would really love to see you guys have a decision framework in place. Not necessarily a home under contract, but that's possible, especially if your timeline is a little bit sooner, but a framework. You should be able to answer a few questions by this point. Which communities am I still interested in? Which communities are totally out? What price range feels comfortable? What house features turn out to be really, truly important to me? Which compromises am I willing to make? Which compromises am I not willing to make? And finally, if the right house came up, would you be willing to write an offer remotely? Is that something you'd be comfortable with, not having actually seen the house physically yourself? And that last question is really important because if we've done this trip well, you may not necessarily feel the need to be physically in every home that you want to write an offer on. If we've done our homework and narrowed everything down, we're going to be able to feel pretty confident writing an offer as long as it checks all of our boxes. You've seen enough homes, you've understanding the neighborhoods, and you've established your standards. Now we can walk through a home with I have you on video and you can compare it against properties you've already seen and make a really informed decision. And that's a much stronger position to be in than trying to learn the entire Boulder area just through listing photos. All right, our 3-day trip is over and now we're back home, we're back to normal life, and we're in a much stronger position. Now, when a new listing comes in the market, we don't have to say, do I like this home? Now we can say like, hey, do you remember that home on day 2? You love the layout, you love the color, but the yard was a little small. Well, this is the exact same floor plan, same color, and the yard is twice as big. So now we're comparing and contrasting with experience. This trip has created reference points, and so now you can make remote decisions much more confidently and much more nimbly, so you're not spending a ton of time going back and forth, or you don't have to just hope and pray that the home you love is available when you have time to be out here in Boulder physically. So if you have 3 days to find a home in Boulder, we do not measure success by the number of homes we see. We're going to measure success by the number of decisions that we make. On day 1, we're going to decide where do you want to live. On day 2, we're going to decide what do you want to buy. And on day 3, we're going to make sure that you're comfortable using the information we gained to make a home buying decision. That's how you turn just any long weekend into an effective home buying trip instead of just a blur of kitchens and basements. So if you're planning a house hunting trip to Boulder, I want you to send me 4 pieces of information. Your flight dates, your budget, where you'll be commuting to most of your week, and the must-have features for your next home. From that, we'll put together a great 3-day weekend. We'll find out where you want to live, what you want to buy, and make sure you're comfortable using that information to write an offer. My information's all down below, guys. Have a great day.